Welcome, everybody, to our April Forgotten Grapes Wine Club virtual tasting. I'm very excited about this month's selections, as many of you already know, and I'm excited about our guest. This is the first time in 6 years that we are doing our revisit, one of those fun winery tasting room only terms that you hear. You never walk into a restaurant and go, I'd really like to revisit that ribeye, or can I revisit the cream spinach? That was really nice. So what we're going to be doing this year, throughout the year, is revisiting some of the wineries that we first featured that were nice enough to help us when we were getting started with the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club back in 2020 and 2021. We're going to be revisiting some of those winemakers, revisiting the wines, tasting their new stuff, catching up with them, finding out what they've been up to the last 4, 5, 6 years, and just having a good time meeting some of the new for some of you this is going to be your first experience with them. For some of you it's going to be like old home week or a reunion, which will be fun. So I'm super excited to kick this off with Larry Schaffer from Tercero Wines, one of my good old friends, one of the first people I met when I got into the wine business, and somebody who needs no introduction, but if you don't introduce him, he will spend 10 minutes introducing himself. So I will do a quick introduction on that. Before we begin, just a couple of rules as we always go with. Everybody's going to remain muted for this. So if you have any questions for Larry, please throw them into the chat. I'll be monitoring that and ask those questions over the course of it. We also love your comments. If you have any comments about the wines you're tasting, when we talk food pairings, always a good question or a good time to comment. Let us know what you're eating along with us. That would be great. And then for those of you who can't join us or want to revisit this conversation, we'll be recording it and I'll put it up on our YouTube channel tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that. Now, without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, one of the four members of my Forgotten Grapes Mount Rushmore, Larry Schaffer. Larry, we're excited to have you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me back, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's been too long. So what have you been up to for the last 4.5+ years?
Oh, let's see. Getting through COVID, doing about
Mhm.
150 of these Zoom tastings, which
Yeah, you are
actually
prolific.
that was actually it changed the way I think about and act and talk about wine for sure. Um, Getting remarried, having a nearly 4-year-old child, in addition to my 27, 25, and 23-year-olds. So yeah, busy doing that. Busy expanding the wines that I'm making. The one word that hopefully will continue to describe me as a winemaker is curious. And because of that, I love to explore different varieties. And
Yeah,
Santa Barbara County is a great place for that.
we'll also accept eclectic, off the beaten path, and weird for synonyms for describing
Perfect.
you as a winemaker.
Perfect. I'll just
Go
just
ahead.
just don't call me Shirley.
Surely you can't be serious. Before we begin, let's walk through the order that we're going to be drinking tonight. We're going to be doing things a little differently because, again, Larry is curious and eclectic. You know, pick your own synonym there. So we're going to start off with his 2023 Picpoul. Then we'll be moving on to the 2020 Zaca Mesa Cinsault, which I am super, super excited about. The 2018 Carignan, we flipped the script a little bit. I know the email said we were going to be doing Mourvèdre, but Larry decided that Carignan was the way to go. Yeah, I'm throwing you under the bus on this one, Larry. But
Sure.
Carignan, a favorite I know among so many of our wine club members. It feels like whenever there's a Carignan offered by a winery, we have to feature it. So it only made sense to feature that. And then last but not least, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have our 2016 Marsanne at the end. And for those of you who are planning on opening this up and joining us, if you have this in an ice bucket or in the refrigerator right now, take it out because Larry loves his Rhone whites to be served at room temperature, just with the slightest chill, to bring out the aromatics. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get to this next one. But I know when we did the Roussanne way back in 2021, that was a commandment that you had back then, was to serve it room temp. So I implore all of you, I urge, I advise all of you to do the same to really get the full experience of this. Perfect. So, Larry, let's start by talking a little bit about your journey into wine. How did you get into the wine business, start making wine, and what was it that led you to not just Rhone varietals, but kind of such a interesting collection of grapes?
So I did not grow up in a family that drank wine. I didn't, my parents didn't own a vineyard or a winery. And again, they didn't even drink wine whatsoever. So I was not interested in wine for a very long time. I started school, college at UC Davis, but I was pre-business at that point. I wasn't thinking about wine. Would have saved me a lot of time had it been the forethought to think about wine at that point, but I wasn't. I transferred from Davis to Berkeley, graduated from the Haas Business School, and I took pictures of a punk band in the LA music scene when I was in high school, and I really wanted to get into the music industry. And I did at Berkeley, but I got in as a financial analyst, and I'm a much better, I think I'm a much better
That's super
people
fun.
person than a number cruncher. And I always, the analogy I always use is like going to work in the record industry and not being involved in kind of the creation is kind of like going to work for Ben and Jerry's and never being able to taste any ice cream. It sounds great, but it's kind of lacking. So I left that. I went into publishing, educational publishing, and trade publishing. And about 25 years ago, I got to a point where I felt like my mind wasn't being challenged. Started having kids, wanted to show my kids you really should enjoy what you do on a daily basis. Started going back to school, living in Orange County at community colleges, literally with kids who could have been my kids, taking all the chemistry courses and science courses I swore I would never, ever take. I did that for 2 years. I worked part-time in Temecula at a couple of wineries for 2 years. And then I transferred back to Davis, got my master's in viticulture and enology. My master's thesis was on tannin development in Syrah. So I was already kind of leaning towards Syrah. And then I started exploring more Rhone varieties. I chose Santa Barbara County. All my research was done with wineries in Napa and Sonoma, and that's where I would have been a lot easier getting a job. But I really like the vibe of Santa Barbara County. I find that wine here is more about the product and less about the pomp and circumstance for the most part. And I wanted to be a part of that community. I started doing Rhone varieties because I've always been the fan of of the underdog. I didn't want to do Pinot and Chardonnay because everyone was doing Pinot and Chardonnay. So I wanted to try to find a path that was different. That has been the bane of my existence ever since. It's great to do all these varieties, but it's an uphill battle doing these varieties that are lesser known. They're becoming certainly more popular, but most consumers, as we all know, are familiar with 5 or 6 varieties, and anything outside of that needs a number of steps of discussion to get them to understand what they are. So, and I know that, and I'm happy with that. I don't mind hand selling. I don't mind talking about what I do, but I know it's an uphill battle. So, mainly Rhone varieties. There's an organization called the Rhone Rangers. I'm now president of the board of directors. So I've been president for about a year and a half. I'll be president until the end of the year, and then I'll still stay on the executive team as the kind of past president. I've been a board member for 15 years of that organization. I'm very, very enthusiastic about Rhone varieties as as many of the varieties people really should be drinking, they just don't know about them. So that's
You
my
like the
goal.
Jerome Powell of the Rhone Rangers at this point.
Well,
Like your term
I
is going to be up, but you're going to stay on the board and make sure.
they're never gonna get rid of me. So no, I'm very very passionate about things that I think are kind of the right things. Let's put it that way. You know, Rhone varieties, there's 22 of them. I like to say they're kind of like an orchestra. You've got a French horn, you got a piccolo, you got everything. They all are beautiful on their own, but they all work well together. But I like showing off. I do blends, but I tend to do more individual varieties because love to show off the nuance of individual varieties.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things that kind of attracted me to your wines and your winemaking is the fact that you do focus on the single varietals, not just the Rhones, not just the weird stuff, but you're not afraid to put a Counoise or a Cinsault or a Carignan or a Marsanne in a bottle by itself and let it stand up for itself. Show what that varietal is all about. And I think especially like you were saying, 15, 20 years ago before people started to get more familiar with some of these lesser known varietals, and they started popping up more and more. That was a courageous act because, like we were talking about earlier, that's a hand sell. I mean, you literally have to be educating people while you're pouring them, and there are a lot of people who are just going to stick their glass out and go, "Pinot me, that's what I want." Buttery shard, boom. So it takes a lot of effort. Talk a little bit about that, and then I want to circle back to before we dive into the Picpoul. I want to talk a little bit about your time in Temecula. I'm always learning new facts about you, and that was one that I was not aware of, and I want to know what in Temecula has kind of rubbed off on you and brought you into, what have you brought from Temecula into your winemaking today?
I'll answer that first question. Really nothing.
Okay, fair
And not that that's a negative, but when I was working in Temecula, I did a little bit of work at Hart Winery, which is no longer in existence. A
enough.
Halter Ranch purchased them. And then I worked at Maurice Curie, which is
Yep.
no longer, I think Maurice Curie still might be, but they had another label.
Yeah.
The winemaker that I worked with was awesome. Mike Tingley, he had been making wine for about 20 years. Uh,
Yes.
he wasn't able to make the wines he wanted to because the owners wanted very specific styles of wine. So
Right.
pretty much every wine we produced had some sweetness to it. Red, white, rosé. Because again, that's what the owner wanted, and the winemaker was going to do that. The winemaker made wine for other people that he was much happier consulting than he was kind of his full-time job. Um, so I learned a little bit about the process there, but not really anything that's transferable. I've spent a little bit of time in Temecula recently with a couple of winemakers, and there's a lot of fun stuff going on down there. I think Temecula wine is kind of like Texas wine. When you hear that term, it's not an oxymoron per se, but people don't necessarily take it seriously. But there's some, now that Temecula kind of understands what they can do well, there are some wineries that are getting a lot more forward thinking in terms of producing lighter reds, higher acid whites by picking earlier, etc.
Yeah, the knock on Temecula has always been, because they're, so inundated with wine enthusiasts, let's call them, from San Diego, the Inland Empire, Orange County, LA, given their proximity, and people who may not be as sophisticated about their knowledge, that they work with a lot of the grapes that they shouldn't necessarily work with in that area, because those are the grapes that people are familiar with: Cab, Chard, Sauvignon Blanc, things that just don't work in that warmer environment down there. One of the things I loved about Hart was he was working with Syrah. He had very high elevation vineyards, and uh, he. I always said he was sort of the upper echelon, if not the premier winemaker down in that area.
Yeah, I mean he never did white wines. He only did red wines. So he definitely was different. He worked with a lot of old Rancho Cucamonga, Zinfandel, which was a lot of fun as well. Um, I think every region has its pluses and minuses. Sometimes it's difficult to see that. Like for instance, I was in Texas for the Rhone Rangers recently, and there are California winemakers that will try Texas wines and say they're not balanced, especially Texas reds. I don't think that they're not balanced. I think they're doing what they can with Texas fruit in Texas agriculture. They deal with things we don't deal with. They had in March 75-80% of the hill country grapes were wiped out by frost. Most vineyards in the hill country have hail netting on them. So what they're dealing with there, we just don't deal with. It's incomparable from a viticultural standpoint. So I'm a fan of all wine. I'm a fan of wine from pretty much every region. I want to see everyone succeed in whatever they try to do.
Yeah, one of the things I've always loved about you is you have this sort of optimism about wine and winemaking and wine regions. You're not afraid to, call things like you see them and call people out. But at the same time, there's always a hopefulness in the conversations I've had with you, and certainly on your Facebook and posts on Instagram and other outlets and whatnot, of which you are generally vociferous. Let's circle back to the Rhones, and I want to talk a little bit, since we've got the Picpoul here, the 2023 Picpoul. This is a newer wine for you. I think this is the second vintage that you did of Picpoul, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Um, it's not something that, yeah, when I first met you, you had worked with, and Picpoul it's really such an interesting grape. I feel like it's a four-letter word around my house, but that has to do more with the acidity of some of the Paso Robles versions. It's not my girlfriend is not a fan these days, but I really feel like Picpoul is starting to accelerate among Rhone producers. I feel like it's filling that gap that Sauvignon Blanc fills in a lot of other wineries, that kind of high acid, crisper, lighter white wine, aromatic, very seafood friendly. But I want to get your thoughts on it. Why did you decide to start making Picpoul other than it was there? And what do you see as kind of its future?
Well, first of all, it wasn't there for me to start with. It took me a couple of years to actually get Picpoul. There's not a lot of it planted in Santa Barbara County. There's very few vineyards that have it. Tables Creek brought the cuttings in the 90s. They produced, I believe, their first bottled Picpoul in 2005. So it's not a variety that we've seen in this country very long at all. It's very popular over in the south of France. From what I understand, you can go into pretty much almost any restaurant in London and they have Picpoul by the glass because it grows like a weed in Languedoc. Um, it is Picpoul means lip stinger in French, so the whole idea is it should be bright and crisp, and it should have a lot of acidity. So, Chris, when you were talking about the Paso Picpouls, are they lacking acidity or do they have a lot of acidity?
No, they tend to have a lot of acidity, and that can lead to some like issues with acid reflux and whatnot. It's
Okay.
just it and it might just be that it's one of those things that just hasn't she hasn't found the right pick pool for her, but they do just seem to be a little triggering. But at the same time, Paso with its high heat, it's not a region where you find those kind of high acid wines. So it's been interesting over the last 15, 20 years. First, it was Albarino that kind of made a big splash here and went from 0 to 100 miles an hour, it felt like overnight, in terms of people producing it and growing it. And I really feel like in the last 10, 12 years, it's been Picpoul that we've seen that acceleration. And the two of those on the white spectrum, I feel like are still have a higher growth curve than Viognier, Marsanne, Roussanne, a lot of the traditional Rhone varietals that are being produced in the area.
Well, I think kind of first generation Rhone producers in California concentrated on Roussanne, Marsanne, and Viognier. I think those were the ones that they were told those are the varieties that we really should be planting here.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, Tablas changed that tremendously. Uh, the other thing about Picpoul and Claret Blanche as well, they're very approachable wines young.
Yeah,
Marsanne and Roussanne are not. Marsanne and Roussanne are ageable wines. Picpoul and Claret are not necessarily wines you want to age. Not that they can't age, but that's really not it's not what you intend to do when you purchase them, generally speaking, compared to other white wines.
right.
So I think with the immediacy of people and buying wines and wanting to consume them immediately, Picpoul fits perfectly in that. Now, it's still a pretty minor player, and we're talking only a couple of hundred acres. I mean, there's still not a lot of it produced throughout the states. In fact, and throughout California. In fact, I believe the largest planting of Picpoul in the country is actually in Texas, not in California.
Mhm.
We don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure the largest planting is there. We don't know how much is planted there because they don't have a grape crest report in Texas. So they don't submit information to any source to know how much is being produced. But there's a lot of other varieties like Counoise, for instance. There's only 100 tons produced in California. There,
Right.
that Becker Vineyards produces about 40 themselves in Texas.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about that. But I wanted to make a Picpoul because I wanted a nice crisp kind of starter wine. I didn't
Mhm.
really have that. My Grenache Blanc has pretty good acidity, but not the same type of acidity. So I started with Claret Blanche because I couldn't get Picpoul.
Right.
I was able to get Claret faster. But the Claret I fermented and aged in oak to give it a little bit more texture. The Picpoul is stainless steel fermented, stainless steel aged. It's really a purpose-driven wine. It can be aged in oak. I know that I tried one at Rhone Rangers from Adam, his first one from Ojai Vineyards, and
Mhm.
he aged his in neutral oak, and the oak really wasn't present much. I was
Yeah.
surprised. There's other people that make it with oak down here that I'm not as ecstatic about. The oak to me takes away from the crispness of it. Um,
Yeah.
I'm I call myself a typicist. Like a variety should be somewhat typical of what you expect it to be within
Yes,
reason. And Picpoul should be high acid. I mean, that is its name,
it's the lip
literally.
stinger exactly. Yeah, and you've all got your vocabulary word for the day. Typisticist.
Typicist.
Typicist, which I feel like if you ever do a second label, that's got to be the name of the second label.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't I think it's going to be yeah, no. It'll have something to do with how much I talk. So
Nice.
it'll,
There you
it'll
go.
be it'll be verbosity. How's that?
Vociferous verbosity.
Vociferous, that too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Um, no, and something you said earlier, I think is, and you mentioned Claret Blanche, and that's another grape that we started to see emerge. And again, thanks to Tablas Creek, they're the ones who kind of brought that over. But it does feel like I'm seeing, at least here in Paso Robles, and obviously we're kind of epicenter for Rhones. It does feel like despite the limited amount of acreage of it, you are seeing more and more producers either putting out 100% varietal versions of it or adding it into blends because it provides that acidity to balance out oilier, richer wine like a Roussanne, a Marsanne, a Grenache Blanc, Viognier. But I think, as you said, the fact that it's kind of a Ronco wine, Ronco grape, a set it and forget it. That you can plant it and like Cabernet, it'll just sort of grow and grow and grow. I think that's what, at least personally, I think that's what's leading a lot of the charge for it. That plus its acidity. It's kind of the two and go hand in hand. And I mean, I've seen less Claret Blanche in the market these days. Certainly less Uni Blanc, although Uni's kind of staying steady. But I feel like Picpoul is just popping up hither and yon everywhere.
I think there's more familiarity with it for sure. I think claret is confusing to people
Yeah,
because when I say claret, their first thought is, oh, that's a Bordeaux blend, that's a red.
right.
They're familiar with the Claret.
Yeah, they don't see the I, the
Yeah.
silent
But,
I.
but historically in Chateauneuf, both of these have been blenders to do exactly what you talked about.
Right.
You have Roussanne taking the lead, adding lots of texture, and these wines come in to add the acid that those varieties don't have. So they make something whole, so to speak. But again, that's why I like showing both of them off because I think they're both really interesting. This Picpoul was fermented and aged in stainless steel. It actually saw about 6 months worth of time on its fine lees
Hmm.
in stainless steel to give it a little bit more texture. But it's still a pretty straightforward wine. It really is. I as a winemaker, I really enjoy working with varieties where I don't have to do much. I'm not lazy. I just, as a winemaker, I think the idea is we should be minimalists, and I try to search out varieties that naturally set themselves apart for everything else I work with. It just makes my life easier.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good approach. I mean, I know Tablas Creek, which for a lot of people, especially on the white side of the Rhone varietal, is kind of the standard bearer. And they do single varietal versions, but most of their grapes are going into blends to try to uh, capture that white Chateauneuf de Pop, white Cote de Rhone style of blend. But you do tend to lose or forget what the individual characteristics of the grape are when you do that. I mean, I don't think Tablas has a single varietal pick pool. I don't even know if they're growing. Are they, or do they?
Yeah,
I guess they
in
grow,
fact,
they grow single varietal everything. I just should assume that
yeah,
we're the
the 13 Rhone variety wines, they grow all of them. The 13 Chateauneuf variety,
yeah.
not really, there's 22 Rhone varieties, 13 from Chateauneuf. They grow each of those 13 Chateauneufs, and they make enough of those to at least do small bottlings
Yeah.
of each of those 13.
In
Uh,
most years, every now and then, like they can't do a Tourette Noir or something like that. But
correct,
they're
correct.
like they've got enough Blanc to do a regular bottling of it every year.
But because they're half owned by the Prin family from Beaucastel, their mindset really is half, I mean, half their body literally is in Chateauneuf. And in Chateauneuf, you don't bottle these varieties into separately. They are the focus of Chateauneuf has always been in blends.
Yeah. So Picpoul, I always think of as a very warm weather grape grown down in the Languedoc, like the Picpoul de Panay, coastal, but still pretty hot summers down there. Again, it seems to be thriving here in Paso. Santa Barbara County, I always think of as a little bit cooler. Are you looking for warmer sources for your Picpoul? Places like, Happy Canyon as opposed to Ballard Canyon, or starting to get further west, or Santa Maria? Or what are you, where are you sourcing your Picpoul from? And, is there something specific you're looking for?
Well, as I said before, there are very few places growing it, so
Right.
beggars can't be choosers, in all honesty. The pick pool so far that I've gotten has come from Happy Canyon, from the Santa Ynez Vineyard. It crops pretty heavy out there, but it is warm out there. And if you pick it early enough, it's going to have good acidity. There's a good chance I'm actually going to be getting pick pool this year from the Nolan Vineyard, which is in Los Alamos on Alisos Canyon Road. So
Okay.
different climate, but it will and different. San Ynez Vineyard is flat. I mean, it's like 100 acres of pretty flat ground. Nolan Vineyard has all these nooks and crannies, so there will be some differences for sure based on that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm intrigued to try that and compare the 23 that you got here, the 24 with the 26 if you do get that Nolan vineyard. You mentioned 100% stainless steel. Um, is this a wine? You mentioned part of the reason that Picpoul was um, an interesting grape to a lot of growers is because it can be drunk young. It's not a wine that needs a lot of aging. Um, is this a wine that you think can hold up? Is it something to, keep in your cellar, or is this really one to enjoy on a young basis?
It's a great question, and I guess the way I would answer that is I've only made two of them. I don't know.
Yeah,
I work with a lot of, I mean, seriously, I mean, I work with a lot of varieties that are not known to age well. Like I do carbonic wines. My
right.
2021 carbonic wine is drinking beautifully now, which makes no sense logically when you think of Beaujolais Nouveau, right? So, um, I think that Picpoul stands a chance of being age-worthy because of the acid. Um, I did try the very first bottling of Picpoul that Topless did in 2005 last year with
Nice.
Jason at a dinner, and it was still very much alive. It did not have the vibrancy of a young wine.
Yeah,
So it also depends upon what you're looking for in a wine, right? If you really like if you think of Picpoul as high acid, refreshing, then you're going to probably want to drink them younger than older. I do
yeah,
put a tin line screw cap, which is going to hold on to the freshness longer than if it was a polymer based. But
right.
I wouldn't think the wine is going to become radically more interesting if it ages for a long time as opposed to some of the other whites that I work with. But I don't know with certainty.
Yeah, it always feels like acidity is, kind of one of the first things to drop out of a wine if you age it for long enough. So that's always the concern with that. But at the same time, I mean, a lot of people think of Picpoul as it's up there with Muscadet as sort of the like go-to oyster wine. But having a Picpoul with a little bit of slight oxidation and that acid dropping out could really be intriguing with the saltiness and the fattiness of an oyster. So.
Well, the only thing to counter that is it is a pretty low alcohol wine. So from a body standpoint, that
Mhm.
oxidation might not work the same way as it's going to work with some of the other Rhone varieties that I work with.
Yeah,
Just back at napkin. Now we're just talking back at napkin, quote unquote science, right? We don't
right.
know. And that's what's going to become interesting as I do set aside a number of cases to kind of see what happens. My hope is that every wine that I produce has a good life ahead of it. So whenever people open it, they're going to enjoy it. But yeah, I don't. There's another winery near me that, it's easy for them to sell their most expensive wine because they tell people you can lay it down for 20 years. I'm like, you guys have been in business for 15. How do you know? Right. So I get the idea, and I think consumers love to hear the ageability thing, which I get from one perspective, but um, many people don't lay their wines down as long as they used to. They
No,
want to get more immediate enjoyment, which is changing the way wines in general are made. Wines are now being made for the most part to be enjoyed young, even big Napa cabs, Paso
right.
Syrahs. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with the ageability of those wines because of the way that they're being made now.
Yeah.
I have no desire to do that.
No, that's an interesting point. I feel like if people are laying wines down, it's inadvertently. It's because they're getting so inundated with club shipments that They feel like if they've got a 60, 70, $80 bottle, they have to hold on to it, and then they kind of forget about it. And at some point, 5 years, 10 years later, they're like, oh shit, like I've got these bottles, I need to start drinking them. And they pop them open and try them, and hopefully they're not vinegar at that point. But it's not an intentional aging.
Well, and I think a lot of the wines are being made now where they're not really aging.
Yeah,
Or like you try them 10 years from now and they're the same wine
that's true.
because of the I don't want to say manipulation, but I will say manipulation. We can use that word in very
I like McDonaldization of it.
I just think that there's and this is true at all price points. We're not talking about only, inexpensive wines.
Right.
There's producers up in Napa that I've had 10-year-old Napa cabs that taste, brand new, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, isn't that great? They taste brand new." I'm like, "No. I want to see evolution in those wines. I don't want to see them stuck in time." It's one of
But
the
that's
things.
a marketing sales thing. It's the idea of if I'm going to buy a bottle of the Prisoner, if I'm going to buy a bottle of Opus One, you know, the vintage should matter. I want it to taste exactly the same. Maybe not Opus One, but like Camus or some of the big guys that are out there. And the same is true with the smaller guys. I mean, the less expensive stuff. If it's a $2 Chuck, you want it to taste like a $2 Chuck. You don't want to be surprised by it.
Well, and I have no problem with that in general. I mean, I think that one of the problems in our industry is that, and we've talked about this often, Chris, but our industry tells people drink what you want to drink, but we don't let you. We judge the heck out of you. And in the last 5 years with social
Yeah,
media, I think it's become worse. So I'm truly going to be the Beastie Boys of wine. I'm going to fight for your right to drink what you want, however you want to, because ultimately I don't care. But because we tell people these things, people are getting even more intimidated about trying wines. And it sucks. I mean, because I think more people would enjoy wine if they didn't feel like they're walking on eggshells all the time. They're worried they're going to say the wrong thing. They're worried they're going to buy the wrong thing. Um, and it's just terrible. I mean, people will find a wine they like, and then on some somm will say, "Well, that's mass produced. You shouldn't be drinking that." Now they're confused because they like it, but an expert is saying they shouldn't be drinking it. So now what do they do? So
right. But
again,
but
just
show me an influencer that says I'm going to take the snobbery out of wine, and I will show you every wine influencer that's out there today. Like nobody's like I'm putting the snobbery into wine. I want to be elite and whatnot.
but most of those influencers are not they're not doing a very good, if that is their role, they're doing a very poor job of making it more accessible to everybody, I think.
No,
Yeah.
they're basically there just to get free wine and free trips, and that's pretty much it.
So a question came up that I will answer. So all my wines are screw capped. I've been 100% screw cap for 20 years. I do not believe screw caps are the best closure. I don't think there is such a thing as a best closure, but I'm very happy about the way that my wines have developed under screw cap. I use two different liners. So most people think that a screw cap wine is a closed environment, and it's not. If you open the Picpoul and you look inside of the cap, it's a silver or tin base liner. That's going to allow just a little bit of oxygen in. When you open the cap on the reds, it's a white liner or a polymer liner. That's going to allow more oxygen to get in. So there is a science behind screw caps. Um, but again, I don't think they're the perfect closure. I've just been very happy about the way that my wines have developed. And they do develop. There's this thought that wine stays in suspension under a screw cap because people don't believe it breathes, but it does. Chris, I think you're stuck.
You're Please, there we go. All right, back. Sorry about that, everybody.
Okay.
But you're right. With screw caps, a lot of people don't realize that it's the screw caps themselves sort of slide on, and then you have to use a machine that crimps them. Um,
Well,
and
not these ones.
okay, all right. Well, yours are different. Most of them use a crimping machine, and that machine combined with imperfect means that there are going to be gaps for oxygen to get in there. So it's similar to corks in that way, and that yeah, there can be a natural oxidation process happening with corks as well. A good transition for us to get into the Cinsault, the Zaca Mesa Cinsault. And at this point, I know because she has joined us here. Marcy emailed me a question in advance that I want to read to you. Um, I think it's pretty interesting. So she says, I've recently been turned on to Cinsault from the Bechtold Vineyard in Lodi, which is wonderful. It's Turley's. They're 23 and 24. Please expand on the differences. This sounds like something you should be writing in a blue book, in a college lecture, college exam. Please expand on the difference between the Zaca Mesa terroir qualities, etc., and the Bechtold Cinsault, as you mentioned, its notoriety, and perhaps what's happening with Cinsault in the Santa Barbara, Paso, Lodi areas. So, Larry, the rest of the remaining 2 hours is yours.
That's a great question. The Bechtold Vineyard, for those who don't know, was planted in 1888. It is the oldest Cinsault vineyard in the world. It is, I believe, owned by the Michael David Winery. And
I believe it's still owned by, that's Jesse's Grove that owns it actually and monitors it.
okay,
But maybe I'm wrong. Last time I visited it, it was Jesse's Grove who owned and oversaw it, but they might have sold to Michael David.
gotcha. Because it's that old, it is very going to be different than any other vineyard in the world in terms of the fruit that it's going to produce. Um, Cinsault loves heat. It is a very late ripening variety. The clusters are huge. The berries, think of the largest table grape you can, and that's the size of those berries. So the cluster is going to be, I mean, think of like if we think of like a Pinot cluster. If you put a Pinot cluster next to a Cinsault cluster, it looks like the Cinsault cluster pooped out the Pinot cluster. I mean, it's that big. It is that big a difference in size.
It's daddy shark and baby shark.
It's huge. And so it takes a lot of heat to ripen those clusters and their late ripening varieties. So it's a variety that is challenging to get high in sugar. Because of the large berries, it's never going to be really dark. It's never going to, I mean, there are ways to darken the wine, and some winemakers will do things like bleed 15-20% of the juice off immediately to add color. They might blend something else in to add color. But Cinsault naturally produces a lighter red wine that generally is lower in alcohol, though many from Bechtold I know can get up into the 14%. It'd be impossible for me to make a wine that high in sugar from the vineyards I work with. Um, it and again, you're just waiting for it to ripen, and sometimes that ripening is just very, very slow. The block at Zaca Mesa, unfortunately, the grapes have now been pulled. Zaca
Oh,
Mesa got rid of about 40% of their vines, and Cinsault really had no place in their portfolio. They
yep.
used to make a wine called Z Cuvée way back in the day, and they decided to not make that. That's why they were selling off this, and so it was a 1 acre block on the top of the hill that was kind of away from most of their other vines. It was pretty much self-regulating because the vines were originally own-rooted Cabernet that were grafted over to Cinsault. The vines were about 40 years old. Or the roots were about 40 years old. So they really didn't have to do much farming there. Ants were a problem, but other than that, so really it was just a matter of, it was a waiting game. And 2020 was the first year I worked with that fruit. And I did not pick these grapes until well into November, worried that they weren't going to come off at all. And I had many arguments with them about what we can do about getting them riper, and there really wasn't much you can do. So I was somewhat flying blind. I'd worked with Cinsault when I was at Fest Parker, but Cinsault would always be picked at the same time, Carignan and Counoise, and it would be blended together and go into Frontier Red. It never had its own identity. Um, but I love these lighter red varieties. I started making Cinsault from Camp 4 in 2015. That was my first year making Cinsault. And I still have bottles of the 2015, and it's drinking gorgeously, even though that's not a variety, again, that I would think would have a tremendous amount of age worthiness because of how light it is. I refer to this wine as an acoustic or unplugged red. In the face of big and bold, this is my 27-year-old in a corner with ukulele unmiked. Um, it's not a fully amped band, and I think there's beauty in that. I would not have made this wine 15 years ago. I would have thought, why would anyone buy a light red wine? And if you look at most mass market wines, they are dark as can be because people drink with their eyes. And when you see a dark wine, you think it has more of whatever is. I don't know what that
Yes.
is.
Hello, Mega Purple.
Well, or just, I mean, but or Alicante Boucher or Petit
Right.
Syrah, or it's just dark, right? So some winemakers are uncomfortable working with a variety like this, except for rosé. and Cinsault is a readily used variety for rosé as well. There is not a lot of Cinsault. Uh, um,
Less than 150 acres in the entire
yeah,
state.
800 tons produced
Yep.
in 2025. If you think of something like Syrah, there's like 35,000 tons of Syrah produced. So you kind of compare and contrast. There's more Syrah produced, I believe, than all other 21 Rhone varieties combined. So it really does dwarf everything else. And Cinsault has a place in a blend. I do use it in blends, but because it's so light, it has a place in aromatics, but not in texture. But these grapes come in. I foot stomp all my red grapes. I ferment with the stems. So on day one, and you can see on my website, anyone who hasn't gone there, there's a video of me foot stomping. So the grapes are delivered in half-ton bins, 4 foot by 4 foot by 3 foot. If there's leaves on the surface, I pull them off. Other than that, what came in is going in. I take my shoes and socks off. I jump in. I'm in the bin, each bin for about 10 minutes, trying to crush. I'm ending up crushing between a quarter and a third of the clusters. I then take 2 of those bins and put them into a 1.5 ton fermenter, and I'm able to do punch downs on day two. Um, so I'm using the stems. I want to integrate those stems into the fermentation as much as possible because stems are going to add bitter compounds, they're going to add tannins, and they're going to change the aromatics of a wine. So in this wine, there's a little peppery quality that comes across from those stems. Most people, when they hear stems, they think of stemmy and they think of green, coarse qualities. And that certainly can happen when you do stem inclusion. There are some wineries around here that do it with Pinot that really stands out. I've been doing 100% stems on all my reds for about 12 years now and think I have a pretty good handle on making sure that that does not happen. And I'm drinking the same wine. I love the aromatics of this wine. I think it is just pretty. It is oftentimes compared to Pinot, even though it's not Pinot-like per se, but texturally, some people will compare it to Pinot. But it's just light and bright. For me, from a food perspective, it's incredibly versatile. I think when we think of pairing wines, we oftentimes go towards heavier reds. Light reds will pretty much go with anything. And when I eat, I never want my wine to overwhelm the food. And this tends not to overwhelm food because it's so light. So I'll go
Yes.
2 or 3 courses with this wine and be happy.
Nice. Thank you for continuing to talk during my technical difficulties. I appreciate you staying with it. Um, yeah, Cinsault is just an amazing grape. We mentioned Temecula earlier, and I've always been of the belief that, one of the grapes that could really thrive and establish and create a name for itself down in Temecula would be Cinsault because of the heat that's down there and the amount of time that it needs to ripen. But Bechtold is just an amazing place. It's a mecca for me. It's one of my favorite places on earth. You walk into that vineyard and it's just, gravel and dirt, and then these tiny little gnarled vines coming out of it. And it's very much like Burgundy, where each row has a stake and a slate side in front of it that tells you which vineyard gets the grapes from that row, and basically what's harvested from it is what you get. It's just an amazing place, but I imagine, yeah, very different than Zaca Mesa and some of the other vineyards in Santa Barbara because of the cooler temperatures down there.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gets warm enough for sure. But not warm enough again to get that 14% like they're going to out there in Lodi.
Yeah,
There are only a handful of Cinsault vineyards. I believe so I used to get it from Camp 4. I think Camp 4 has pulled their Cinsault as well. So there's
right.
only a couple of vineyards that I have to choose from should I when I produce my next Cinsault. Um, and so I'll have to kind of consider that as I move forward. That's one of the challenging things with some of these off the cuff varieties that does a vineyard want to commit money to growing them if there's not a lot of demand for them. So
Yeah. Well, if you need some Paso so let me know because I've got some hookups if I'm willing to share.
yeah, I think you've heard me say I have no plans of ever working with Paso fruit. Nothing wrong with it, but I'm very much a Santa Barbara County homer. But
Just
I
so
also
by.
but I also learned not to ever say never or always, so you just don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, the lightness of this is just what's delicious. And Cinsault is one of those grapes, like a Carignan, like some Grenache, that it feels like the older the vines get, the better the wines can be. Maybe it's just due to shrinkage of those berries and those clusters, getting higher sugar, less water in them. But some of the old vine Cinsauts that I've had, I find young Cinsault, young planted Cinsault has a very green vegetal note to it. And that might also be just not allowing it to get to full ripeness. But as those vines get older, it brings out more of that complex kind of like strawberry jam, that kind of lighter fruit note component to it.
Yeah, again, I've only worked with two sites at this point, and they're about 20 years difference, but neither of them are 150-year-old vines, so 140-year-old vines. So it's impossible to compare and contrast. The other thing is, I'm not sure what winemaking techniques take place of everyone who works with the Bechtold Vineyard. So they may be making wine in a very different style than I do. Um,
Yeah.
so
So, what are some of your techniques for making this particular wine? What are you doing any like neutral barrel aging on this, or what's the production? And if you
so
talked about it earlier, I apologize, but I got kicked
no,
off.
no. So my general philosophy with wine, as I said, kind of from the get-go, is to be a minimalist. But I still have a science background, so that's going to guide me to some extent. So the grapes come in, they're foot stomped, they're dumped into a fermenter. I do one punch down a day until it kicks off fermentation. I let it kick off fermentation naturally, and then I inoculate it with the yeast to make sure that it is going to make it all the way through the entire process. I'm monitoring the fermentation daily, normally doing two punch downs a day. The natural cold soak before fermentation is really dependent upon ambient temperature and when the grapes are picked. If they're picked really early in the morning and it's a cold day, that might be 3, 4, 5 days before the kickoff. If not, it might be faster than that. Um, and then with Cinsault berries are so large that they tend to form a cap pretty quickly. And so the
Mhm.
fermentation tends to kick off faster than other varieties do. Um, the fermentation smells and some at some point like this wine does, just beautiful fruit coming off it in a wonderful way. The stems are more noticeable as a young wine. As it ages, those stems become integrated and really kind of add a spice quality to the wine, which I really like. Um, but I age in all older oak barrels. The newest oak barrel I've ever used on reds is a 4-year-old barrel. So we talk about neutral, and neutral really shouldn't be an age. It should really be an outcome. The idea of
Right.
using neutral barrels are they should not add oak flavoring or oak aromatics into a wine, but that's not always the case because some people will consider, say, like a 2-year-old barrel to be a neutral barrel, and a 2-year-old barrel still has a lot of oak influence in it. If you use American oak, even a 10-year-old American oak barrel is still going to provide a vanillin quality to the wine. So I don't use
Mm.
American oak at all because I don't want that. I don't want oak again to be a signature of the product. When people say they like the vanilla, chocolate, butterscotch in a wine, I'm like, well, here you should drink bourbon. You
Yeah.
like oak, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not. And I've worked. I mean, at Fess Parker, we would buy hundreds of new oak barrels a year. I understand the quote unquote sexiness of new oak, but I also understand that oftentimes it masks what's beautiful underneath it. And I
Right.
work with beautiful fruits, and if this wine had new oak on it, it would wall up the aromatics entirely. The delicacy of this wine would be gone. So,
No, that makes a lot of sense. And Cinsault is such a delicate wine that it doesn't need oak. In fact, I'm always have you ever thought about doing stainless steel on Cinsault just to maybe bring out even a little more of the acidity on it?
I have done stainless steel as part of a wine I used to do called Aberration.
Hmm.
Stainless steel fermented wine. It's not something I prefer because even that neutral oak is going to give that wine texture. So I want this wine because it's so light. If this wine was done in stainless steel, that texture in the middle of the wine would probably go away. And I think it would
Right.
be too simple of a wine. Um, and again, there's a time and a place. Like people ask me all the time if they should chill this wine. And many people do. I prefer it not chilled because it's such a delicate wine. I don't want to mask When you chill a wine, the aromatics are gonna be toned down a little bit more. The
Yeah.
texture is gonna be toned down. I don't want to do that. But if that's how somebody prefers to drink it, I have no problem with that, and I understand why they would.
Yes. No, we understand you live in like the 1870s and, don't believe in ice boxes or any sort of chilling of the wines. Um, no, it's a beautiful wine, and one of the things I love about Cinsault done right is that creamy texture on the palate. It has almost a richness to its body. Are you doing any stem inclusion? I know stem inclusion usually will bring a little bit of acidity to a wine, but can add a little bit of body as well.
All of my reds since 2013 are 100% stem.
Okay.
Every single one. That includes Pinot, that includes Cab Franc. I really like what stem it includes Petit Syrah. I really like what stems bring to the table. The challenge with stems is, again, like I said before, making sure that it's not stemmy. The
Right.
whole idea of building complexity in wine is to make sure that not any one thing stands out. So
Yeah.
stem management is no different than alcohol management, no different than oak management, that you really need to make sure there's two main things. One is fermentation temperature. You don't want to ferment it too high, because the higher the fermentation temperature, the more you're going to extract. And then alcohol. You don't want to do stem inclusion with really higher alcohol wines because your
Mhm.
alcohol is a solvent. People ask me all the time if my stems are brown and lignified, because everyone hears that, well, the only way to work with stems is make sure they're brown and lignified. When they're brown and lignified, they're dead. And I'm really not sure what you're pulling out of dead stems. So I don't worry about them being brown. If that happens, it happens, but that's not my intent. I'll work with bright green stems just as easily as it will brown. Again, those two things I talked about are really important to ensure pulling some stuff out, but not pulling too much out.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's that freshness that you get from the stems, and I imagine with so because you've got the larger berries, you basically have a larger, skin and pulp to stem mass or ratio, I should say, than you would
Yep.
with a Pinot or even Grenache or whatnot. That you don't have to worry as much about limiting that inclusion as you would with some other varietals that are out there.
Without a doubt, that is correct. Yep.
Nice. Um, Beautiful wine. Let's talk food pairing with this one. You know, to me, this like because it's that lighter red, because you can put a little bit of a chill on it, not too much. I feel I always preach the versatility of a Cinsault. I mean, this is a wine you could pair with a filet mignon, but you could also probably pair this with like a lovely shrimp dish if you wanted to. It feels like it can go in a lot of different directions. But what are your thoughts on food pairing with this?
Exactly what you just said. It's light enough to be able to go. It could easily be a multi-course meal. You can start having a glass with an appetizer. It can go with seafood. It can go with a heavier red meat, but some people prefer again to have a darker red wine with heavier meat. They
Yeah.
feel that that's a better pairing. My only thing, as I said at the get-go, is that I never want my wine to overwhelm food. So when I do winemaker dinners, I love pouring lighter reds rather than heavier reds pretty much consistently throughout the meal. I just think it's more interesting. Um, and I think you can do a lot food wise to go with this wine for sure, from the beginning of the meal almost to the end of the meal.
Yeah, I'm thinking everything from like I could see this with a beef carpaccio with capers and lemon to like even a beet carpaccio, like thinly sliced beets with that little bit of sweetness. But um, the notes on this would be delicious. Obviously, incorporating anything with strawberries, a strawberry goat cheese, arugula type of salad would be great with this. Even I think it's got the acidity and the depth to stand up to like pasta dishes, especially if you've got like a spicy I always butcher the name, but like the arrabbiata, um, I think could be a really interesting mix with this.
As I said, because it's a lighter red, as long as it's not overwhelming the dish, I'm happy. So,
Nice.
and I'm not a huge believer that there has to be a perfect pairing. I'm more a matter of experimenting and seeing kind of what works. Because what
Yeah.
works for one person's not going to work for another one. But again, I wouldn't be scared of having this with most appetizers, with most salads, with seafood for sure, and with like a white meat for sure.
There you go. Next time you order trout, order a Cinsault with it. It's going
There
to be
you
a
go.
great.
Sounds good.
Boom. Perfect. All right. Speaking of lighter reds and interesting pairings, let's move on to the 2018 Carignan. Not the 2016 Mourvedre, but that's okay. So Carignan is one of those grapes that those of you who have been in the club for a few years now are very, very familiar with. It is, ranks number 3 in my total overall favorite forgotten grapes of all time, behind Cinsault and Counoise. But such an interesting grape. One I mean, if we think Cinsault is rare, it feels like Carignan is even rarer than that, especially older vine versions of it. And like Cinsault, it's another grape that really ages well on the vine. As the vines get older, it feels like it produces better and better quality Carignan grapes. So take us through how you decided to jump into Carignan and where you're sourcing these grapes from.
Sure. So 2016 was my first year making Carignan, and I kind of fell in love with the vine with the wines after having Spanish versions of the variety. I will say it is much more common than Cinsault in terms of the amount that's produced,
Right.
but most Carignan goes into blends. It is not bottled on its own. Old vine Carignan examples out of Mendocino, place like that will be bottled on their own, but most is going to go into blends. In fact, growers elsewhere in the world have been paid to remove Carignan because it produces so much fruit. So at one point, it was one of the most widely planted reds in the south of France. And they actually paid growers in Languedoc to remove it because it was producing too much fruit. And it was producing too many jug wines that they didn't want that to be the case anymore. One of Carignan's nicknames is Dago Red. At the turn of the century, when Italian immigrants on the East Coast wanted to make home wine, Carignan was one of the varieties that would hold its shape going
Yeah.
across and had very thick skins and produced a very dark wine. So it's then again to this day that's why it still is a wonderful blending variety. I had worked with this variety again at Fess Parker. So Fess Parker owned a vineyard called Camp 4. Camp 4 had about 25 different varieties planted. So I was fortunate to be introduced to a lot of these varieties in Santa Barbara County via that vineyard. And there was always this earthy core of Carignan that I loved, but I wouldn't see us produce at Best Parker because we'd always pick much riper. And I
Mhm.
find when Carignan is picked ripe, it makes a pretty generic cherry flavored wine that doesn't have a lot of character. So with most of these varieties, my first goal was to pick them earlier to show off the varietal character of the wine, not show off richness and ripeness. And that's kind of been a hallmark of my winemaking over the last decade, especially, is I've learned that ripeness is a very subjective term, and that when I taste grapes that are really ripe, I don't want to work with them because they've already gone beyond when they're really ripe on the vine, they're going to produce a really ripe wine. And that's not the style of wine I like to make. It's not the style I like to drink. I like to have wines that have some non-fruit elements in them to go along with the fruit. And that's generally not going to happen at higher sugar levels where you're just going to get pure fruit.
Interesting. Um, yeah, Carignan is such a unique grape and has that long history here. Um, I'm intrigued about, like you mentioned your time at Fess Parker. Um, we talked about Temecula earlier, kind of what you took from that, but what did you pick up at your time at Fess Parker that's kind of influenced your winemaking now?
Well, I was fortunate. So my first job out of Davis was the enologist at Fess Parker, and at that point there was an enologist, there were two assistant winemakers, and there were two winemakers. So we had a big staff of people,
Mm.
and all I had really at that point was book knowledge. I had a little bit of knowledge from Temecula, but not a lot. So I had a lot of book knowledge from Davis, but to put that into play was a lot of fun. And Fess Parker produces a lot of wines. And they'll do everything from 1.5 ton box fermenters to 20-ton rotary fermenters and everything in between. So I was a bit of a kid in the candy shop being able to play around with a lot of different varieties, not only that we grew, but that we purchased elsewhere as well. Um, and I learned a lot from the winemakers that were there. It took me about 4 years, I would say, 5 years to really kind of figure out what I wanted to do, regardless of what they were doing. Because
Right.
when I started, it was pretty much like, oh, let me see what they do. That looks good. Not having the confidence to know exactly what I wanted to do. Um, uh, and they have every winemaker that I work with there has a style, and they were developing that style. So I just needed to get to a point where I'm going to develop what my own style was going to be.
Yeah. So what was that fulcrum point that led you to say, I think I've kind of gotten everything I've needed to get out of this Best Parker experience. I'm going to go launch my own brand.
Well, I launched my own brand while I was there,
Right.
in a very small scale, but I really couldn't commit much time to it because of my duties there. So it really was only after I left there that I was able to commit 100% of my time. But um, it, I would say, like I said, about 5 years in, I started doing things a little differently than what everyone else was doing, and kind of started finding my own path. It took me, I want to say, about 10 years really to feel comfortable calling myself a winemaker, and not somebody who is simply, kind of floundering, that I had a intent of what I did. And a lot of that intent came from letting go, and not trying to control the entire process. Winemaking is not something you can control. And I remember I was after I left Fest Parker, I remember I was at another winery making my wines. It was a Saturday morning. I was doing punch downs. I was supposed to come back Saturday afternoon to do more punch downs. My youngest son had a soccer game. I wasn't able to come back, and I didn't go back. And the wine was fine. I let go, and I realized that, it's okay to kind of let go, and the process is going to be what the process is going to be. And that is really what my philosophy is now. I don't, people, but I even had this somewhat at the beginning. I remember my first Mourvedre, 2006, I made my first 100% Mourvedre. And the other winemakers at Fest Parker are like, well, you should blend something in. It's going to make it better. And I looked at them, I said, well, it's going to make it different. I don't know if it's going to make it better. But by having 100% Mourvedre, I knew what that was, right? And that's kind of what we started on that path. Um, but yeah, I left Fest Parker after I'd kind of done what I wanted to do. The other thing is when you're working for somebody else, you have a role, you're not doing everything. And the reason I started my brand was to be able to control the process. I had never created anything in my life. I was always part of a marketing group or something else, but to actually physically create something from scratch all the way through is a pretty exciting thing, and something that I'm really proud I get to do every year.
Nice. Carignan, like Cinsault, like Counoise, it's sort of a grape, not necessarily in decline, but just in small amounts. Why, like, have you seen more of it planted? Do you feel like it's due for a renaissance? Is there a reason why people don't seem reticent to sort of, start new Carignan vineyards out there?
I just think it's reputation more than anything else. Again, it's known as a blending variety. It produces a really big crop. The clusters are really big. I think people are searching for the new and different, not the stuff that's already been.
Right.
Carignan is still a very important variety in Spain. It's still a very important variety elsewhere.
Yeah.
And again, in the Central Valley, it's still a very important variety for blends. But I don't see people clamoring. I don't see a lot of Carignans out there at this point. And the ones that I see out there, oftentimes, like I see people fermenting and aging, for instance, an American oak, which is changing the whole nature of how the grapes, how the wines taste. And then when people are making it, they tend to pick it riper. So again, it has less, to me, less interesting character, but more fruit.
Yeah, it feels like if they're putting it into American oak, it's trying to capture that Spanish style. Since American oak and Tempranillo is such a natural combination, they must think, oh, all Spanish varietals will thrive in American oak, and that's not always the case.
Sure. Sure. And it does, and it is a blender. I mean, I also have a blend called Curiosity, which is equal parts Carignan, Counoise, and Cinsault. So I mean, it does work well in a blend. It definitely adds character to a blend. Um, and it's not a variety that I ever plan on making a lot of. It's just kind of fun because I know it has its own lane, and that's my whole goal with every single wine is to make sure it separates itself from any other wine that I make naturally.
Nice. I'm gonna have to do a side-by-side tasting. Bill Frick, who is also on my Mount Rushmore of Forgotten Grapes producers, he does a wine called C3. That's his blend of Cinsault, Counoise, and Carignan. So
Oh,
I'm going to have to get bottles of both of those and do a side-by-side tasting. So with all of the Carignan that we have featured in this club, and shockingly, there have been quite a few of them, probably most of them that are produced here in California, given how few there are. Um, I always say, for my money, Carignan, especially Old Vine Carignan, is the best steak wine that you will find. It is the best pairing. It's got that high acidity to sort of cut through the fattiness of a steak, but it has that kind of richer, meatier flavors to it, like darker, more savory notes to it. But I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts about Carignan and foods you think that it would pair well with.
I had a guy working for me for a long time who thought this was the perfect Thanksgiving wine. He thought that it had
Hmm.
to him, it went great with cranberries, and it reminded him of, and he actually would put some
Yeah.
in his cranberry sauce. So that was his
Hmm.
kind of perfect pairing. I agree with you. I think that the kind of the rustic streak that this wine has gives it the ability to go with a lot of other types of foods. The Cinsault is so bright, and this definitely has an earthier core, which to me
Yeah.
brings it more towards mushrooms and game and things like that. Whether it's mushrooms or herbaceous things in general, and uh, that could be pasta with herbs and mushrooms. That could be some kind of game meat, whatever people tend to like to eat.
Yeah, things with a lot of like thyme and rosemary, that kind of herbaceous note. Tarragon, I think, is a spice that goes really, really well with the Carignan because it does have that kind of natural pepperiness to it as well, which I always find intriguing.
It does. The stems, I think, uh, bring that out a little bit more as well. The stems, just like with Counoise and Cinsault, the stems are not as noticeable in Carignan because of how large the berries aren't as large, but they are large, and the clusters are really large as well. So the percentage of stems to compared to other varieties is not as high. So the stemminess is not going to be, it's going to be noticeable in a different way.
And again, you're using kind of the multi-use oak on this one, barrels that have been around the block. It sounds like.
Correct. Yeah, like I said, I want the micro oxidation. I don't want overt oakiness.
Yeah, this would be a wine that I could see, you know, heavy tannin vanillins just kind of murdering it to death, putting in things that it doesn't need to have put into it.
Well, it'd be creating an overlay, right? It would be an intentional overlay that the winemaker felt spoke to them of what they believe the variety is. So, that's where, I mean, New Oak has its place. It's just a matter of philosophy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, a beautiful example of Carignan. I'm glad we got to showcase it, and it gives us, another chance in 5 years' time to talk about your Mourvèdre later on. So,
Sounds good.
all right. Last but not least, our unexpected white, the 2016 Marsanne. Um, One of the interesting things that when we sort of talked about you and I before we put out the offer, and we're kind of selecting the wines for this one. Um, I'm still just stunned at how slowly you roll your wines out. That you do so much aging on these wines. I think when we featured the Roussanne back in 2021, I believe it was the like 2014 Roussanne, and the fact that we're doing this Marsanne, it's a 2016. I mean, this is a wine with 10 years of age, a white wine with 10 years of age, which very few people out there are drinking those type of wines. So what is it about your wines that seem to, particularly your white wines, that seem to age so well? And what is it in your winemaking style that you want to see these wines be aged and released on a later basis?
So a couple things you mentioned about not that my white wines I generally don't like to be chilled. I like a lot of my white wines to be chilled. I like the Picpoul to be chilled. I like the Claret to be chilled. I like my Gewürztraminer to be chilled. I am fascinated by how wines change, and I always love to have a white wine at a multitude of temperatures because as a white wine gets warmer, the aromatics become more pronounced, the texture becomes more pronounced. And so not, I don't think all of my white wines have the capability of aging, but high textured white wines, I believe do have the capability of aging. And Marsanne and Roussanne are kind of the Scotch or whiskey of white wines. They're white grapes that don't generally have a lot of acid, but they have a lot of texture. The color you see in these wines was developed very early on. If you see this color in a Chardonnay, you think that it's completely oxidized. But in Marsanne and Roussanne, it's very common to see this deep amber color. It's got a higher level of dissolved solids in the skins, and that's going to lead to a darker color right from the get-go. It's also going to provide this wine with not necessarily tannins, but definitely more of a red wine quality to it. And Roussanne and Marsanne are considered the red wine drinkers' white wines. I pour this, as I said, at room temperature because it really shows off the aromatics. If this was cold, the aromatics would dumb down a little bit, but more especially the texture. I describe this wine as like drinking honey without sweetness. It has that much richness. If we look at wines, and oftentimes wines are described like milk, uh, non-fat, 2% whole. This is going to be heavy cream in terms of the weight in your mouth.
Yeah. No, it has that depth, and Marsanne is it's kind of that like forgotten third white varietal of the Rhone uh, triumvirate. I used to always equate Viognier and Roussanne and Marsanne to Destiny's Child back in my early Forgotten Grapes days, where Viognier was Beyonce, kind of the diva up front, very difficult to work with, but like when done right, can just shine and shine and shine. Roussanne was sort of the second fiddle who is beautiful in duets, pairs up nicely with other things. But Marsanne is kind of the forgotten third member, the one who kind of sits back, has a really eclectic style. A lot of people always talk about nuttiness or almost a marzipan kind of flavor with Marsanne, which I think it can be a turnoff. Take us through your thoughts on Marsanne and what differentiates it from the other two.
Marsanne is more difficult to grow. So a lot of winemakers have gone from working with Marsanne and Roussanne to just working with Roussanne because Marsanne is more challenging. I know Bob Lindquist when he bottles his Marsanne, at least now, I think it's 25% Roussanne because he thinks that it's lacking something that Roussanne's going to bring to the table.
Mhm.
Marsanne tends to not be as interesting aromatically generally. Like you said, when I think of Marsanne historically, I do think of marzipan. I think of a slightly oxidative note.
Yeah,
Um, Whereas with Roussanne also gets that way, but it somehow is brighter
yeah,
than Marsanne in general. I used to hate working with these varieties, both Roussanne and Marsanne, because we would pick them so ripe that they would become um, oily and they would
mhm,
become very bitter, much more high alcohol, and you have to serve them chilled. And when you serve them chilled, you kind of take away the uniqueness of the variety. Um, but I remember, I want to say it was a 1993 Coupe Marsanne from Bob Lindquist that I had about 7 years ago. It's still one of the greatest wines, red or white, that I've ever had in my life. It just took me
yeah,
on a journey that was completely unexpected. Roussanne and Marsanne just have this magical quality about them. Like I said, like almost like Scotch and whiskey, that they're geeky white wines. They're not immediate gratification wines. They're wines you kind of have to sit with and appreciate them for what they are. When I pour these wines, say in a dinner, oftentimes pouring them at the end with cheese, or
mhm,
at the end with like a savory cheesecake of some kind,
yeah,
like a goat cheese cheesecake, something like that. Because these wines, they're not. I mean this in the kindest of ways to myself. They're not pretty. We think of white wines oftentimes as being bright and citrusy, and these are not. And so if you're looking for that in a white wine, it might not be as pleasing. But I just I adore these Roussannes and Marsannes. And the great thing about aging these wines, you're not dependent upon that brightness of acidity or that brightness of citrus, right? You're looking for those oxidative notes. And as the wine ages, that oxidation is going to continue to evolve, and this wine is going to continue to increase in texture, which sets this wine apart.
So at what point, after the production process, did you make the decision to kind of hold off on releasing these, giving them as much age as they are? Because again, this is your new release for this particular wine. So was it something that you just kept tasting it in barrel and decided it needed more time in barrel? Was it something you put in the bottle and kept opening it and said it's just not quite there yet? What was the decision making with that?
The wine's been released now for a couple of years. Marsanne just doesn't sell that well, let's be honest. So,
But
uh,
even a couple of years, I mean, even if we're talking a 2024 release, that's 8 years for a white wine, which, to the average wine drinker, it's, I want the freshest white wine possible. It's the old Steve Martin line from The Jerk. So,
sure. I mean, without a doubt, this wine is not a mainstream wine. I probably made more of it than I should have made because I kind of fell in love with it. So
mhm,
I'll be sitting on this wine for a while, and that's not a bad thing because again, I don't think the wine is going anywhere
right.
except getting more interesting. So it's just a matter of finding people who like this style of wine. Again, it's not a huge subset of people at this point because people are looking for immediate gratification. So by having a wine that has some age on it, that is ready to roll but still has upside potential is kind of my goal with all my wines. I don't
Yeah.
I don't want to release my wines as futures. Have you knowingly have to lay them down, which is why like I just did our first Petit Syrah in 10 years. I opened a bottle after 5 days. It was still hard as nails. I'm like, well, I'm not going to release this for a while because if I do release it, I want people to enjoy it immediately, and they're not going to be able to. So the only reason I would release it is monetary, and
Yeah.
I try for that not to be the determining factor.
Well, and so that's an interesting fact because you have so many different SKUs out there and so many different wines that you've made. Your curiosity, it feels like sometimes gets the better of you in terms of just the amount of sheer number of wines you're making. So how do you prioritize them? In your tasting room, how do you decide which ones to put out? How quickly are you rotating them through? What's the thought process there?
Chaotic. Uh, I would say the thought process is
Fair enough.
I would say every 2 to 3 months I'm going to change up the list. I try not to change it up too much because I want there to be some familiarity. But pretty much every day I'm in here, I'm going to open something that's not on the list as well. I am not making as many wines. So in 2025, just with the economic situation the way it is, I didn't make as many wines as I made in the past. I did make some different things. I made our first pet nats that I had never done before. So I'm still experimenting and not necessarily making every single wine every single year. I'm really thinking more about that in terms of what, where is the place for everything that I'm doing.
Yeah, but I mean, you still have a massive amount of SKUs out there, even if they're older vintages and whatnot. You're not doing it. So how do you decide what to prioritize, what to push, or is it just kind of you want the folks who come into your tasting room and your club members to, discover new things?
A combination of both. I mean, there's definitely some seasonality. I don't want to pour big, heavy reds in the summer. So I've got enough light reds
Right.
for that period of time. Come fall and winter, even though it's not that cold here, I'm going to err more towards a wines like Marsanne, Roussanne, like my Verbiage Blanc blend, which is a Roussanne Marsanne Grenache Blanc blend. I'm going to err more towards Mourvedre and Syrah and less from Cinsault and Counoise and things like that. So I'm thinking about that as I'm putting my list together on a every other month period. But I will tell you, I can't say hi in less than 5 wines. That's my problem. Um, it's
It's true.
difficult. It's
You've
difficult.
always got things
I
under the
do.
tasting room.
I
So
mean, it's
under the
difficult for
bar.
me to tell my story in just a few wines is the way I look at it. And I really feel like I want, people ask me all the time what my favorite wine is. And I tell people that my wines are chapters in a book or songs on an album. They're all part of a whole. And I wouldn't produce a wine unless I felt that it deserved its own place. And I still feel that very strongly.
Nice. So what is your best mixtape? Give us your top 10 lineup, A side and B side.
I can't tell you 10 songs. Can't do it. I can
No, wines. Give your wines as songs. Like if you're putting together greatest hits of Tercero,
Oh,
what's the A side? What's the B side?
it would have to be a triple album. That's the problem. Could decide.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully not triple live album. Is that where we're going?
Well, I mean, but people ask me all the time, like, what wine did I have last night for dinner? And 9 times out of 10, my answer is a gin and tonic. Um, I love drinking wine, but
It's
the problem being a winemaker is I can't remove myself from wine, right? And when I smell wine, I
yeah,
literally have to analyze it. I have to, and I when I drink gin and tonics, I don't think, right? The other thing is I haven't given wine its due time in the past. So I would open a bottle and not let it breathe and not give it a chance to open up over a couple of hour period, and I would toss it when I was starting to drink wine. And I never want to be that guy again. I think every wine deserves time
yeah.
to kind of open up and change, and I want to do that. So my ideal situation is a single glass of wine to enjoy over a 2 or 3 hour period if I can. So that's not
So this
that's
leads
gonna
me to
be
an interesting.
gonna be a single, not a full album.
Right. No, that's like a cuss single is what that is, or an
Exactly.
extended 45 single kind of thing. Um, no, but so as the president of the president of the executive or the chairman, are you president or chairman of the executive board?
I'm president of the board.
The board. Okay, president of the board. Um, I imagine you get to taste a lot of wines from other Rhone producers out there, all throughout not just California, but Oregon, Washington, Virginia, Texas. Um, are you tasting a lot of other wines, from, we won't call them competitors, but other producers, Rhone producers, people doing similar stuff, even other Santa Barbara wineries? And if you are you tasting them for enjoyment, or do you find you're tasting them more critically?
Both. I think it's impossible for a winemaker to taste wine and remove themselves from their role as a winemaker. It's not impossible. It's just very, very challenging to simply enjoy. So if I'm tasting other Rhone varieties, or tasting varieties that I make, I'm probably going to be more critical of those wines than if I'm just drinking them to enjoy. So that if I have an Italian red that I don't make, I can appreciate that in a very different way. Um, so I don't taste other wines to find out what other people are doing. I have my own way of doing things. I don't care what anyone else does.
Okay.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't think, and I'm not afraid to learn. I'm still learning as I go, but I don't want that learning to be by like trying to copy what somebody else does.
No, but that kind of, my next question was going to be, do you find that doing that tasting is beneficial to you? I mean, are you learning things, picking things up, saying, oh, like they got this flavor component, this compound in this particular wine. I make something similar, but I haven't achieved that. I need to figure out how to do that. Or do you find it's much more like, I know how I make wine. I'm going to stay in my lane. Yes, it's fun to taste other stuff, but it this is how I make my wine.
Pretty much the latter. I mean, if I'm tasting with somebody and they're doing some interesting techniques, I'll ask them about the cause and effect of those techniques, just to see what they're doing. But I really enjoy the process in which I make my wine, and I've kind of gotten into a groove. And not that I'm set in that. I tend to be very pragmatic in what I do. So, for instance, pretty much every year I'm going to end up with a picking bin that's leaky, and I'm going to start to foot stomp and it's going to start to leak out, and I need to take the grapes out and not foot stomp those grapes. So if I don't foot stomp the grapes, not a big deal. I mean, that's my goal is to do it, but if I can't do it, I won't do it. If the grapes are really too cold and I don't have surfer booties and I'm not going to wear other boots, I will probably limit my foot stomping. So, but in terms of what other people are doing, it's really difficult. Even if I hear somebody else doing something and I look at the cause and effect, it's difficult for me to have that same result with my winemaking, even if I wanted to.
Okay, interesting. Um, you mentioned the foot stomping. That's kind of become a trademark technique of yours that not a lot of wineries are doing these days. At what point did you start with the foot stomping, and what do you think it adds to the wine?
So in 2011, I did a couple of, oh no, 2009, I did a Grenache and a Syrah that were 100% stems. And I'll never forget the Syrah 2 years in. I had other people try it and they're like, it smelled like liquid smoke and canned green beans. They're like, dude, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, I'm just gonna let it ride. I'm gonna let it ride. Because there really wasn't much I could do at that point. And 6 months later, it smelled like olive tapenade and violets, and it was, I was at a hospice to Rhone tasting, and I'm like, it could have sat on a Northern Rhone table. It takes a long time to understand the cause and effect of stems. And starting in, so by 2013, I kind of had an idea of the style of wine I was making and how different it was, and how the stems kind of played into that. So starting in 2013, I pretty much went 100%. And every year since, I've done 100% on everything. Stems are gonna make my wine more like old school vinyl. They're gonna add scratches and imperfections. And I just think wine is more interesting when it's not overly polished, and stems naturally bring that to the table. They also provide me some tannins that I would normally get from new oak, that I'm not going to get from new oak. So they are going to help provide structure in the wine. I think they do provide a freshness to the wine as well, but I think that's also in
Mhm.
combination of the fact that I also don't rack my wines at all. So I can have wines in oak for 4 years and never take them out of the barrels during that time. Pop them and SO2 them, but I want to leave them as tightly wound as possible. So racking is removing the wine from the barrel, kind of cleaning the wine up, getting rid of the solids that are on the bottom of the barrel, because as wine ages, it's gonna toss solids to the bottom of the barrel. And there's many winemakers that feel those solids are gonna take away from the purity of the fruit, that they're going to add some negative qualities to the wine, and I can see that theoretically that could happen, but pragmatically it doesn't in every case that I've had my wines. And so I'd rather not move my wines. I'd rather keep them as they are so that those wines stay tightly wound longer. We can look at kind of reduction oxidation potential in a wine. And the idea is that if you rack your wine a couple of times, you're oxidizing that wine, you're getting it ready for market faster. It,
Right.
I th I think at the expense of ageability. So I would rather have my wines tighter and not open them up so that as they're sitting in bottle for a couple of years, they're starting that slow development process and they're going to open up more. So that when you're having a 2016 Mourvedre, for instance, which is a current release for me, uh it's not tasting like an old wine. It's tasting like an elegant wine that's had some age, but still really, really bright.
Interesting. So you're not racking the wines, but have you done any batonnage on any of them, particularly some of the lighter whites that you've done stirring those lees, or do you think that's going to add similar oxidation to the same way that racking would?
I haven't. The only time I ever stirred the lees was on one of the first couple of years I did Roussanne and Marsanne, because Roussanne and Marsanne tend to get very reductive when they're going through secondary fermentation, and it kind of scared the living dickens out of me. And as a winemaker, your first thought is, "Oh, I'm gonna have to rack the wine, or I'm gonna have to add copper if they get reductive." But Roussanne and
Right.
Marsanne just need time. And I read a couple of podcasts of old Northern Rhone producers who just said, yeah, that's what happens. And then in the summer, in the spring, it starts warming up in the cellar. Things happen, and that goes away. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So those wines challenged me because they required me to think about making wine, especially white wine, in a different way. But those are the only ones, and I did that again to try to add a little bit of oxygen. But I don't do batonnage to build texture. I'm pretty happy about the texture my wines have. Not to say I wouldn't do that, and it's certainly an experiment that I might do in the future.
Yeah. I love the idea of old Rhone winemakers on podcasts. Like that just doesn't like there's a does not compute, but I can see it there. So,
Well, they're just talking from literally decades of experience, right? There's a lot of things we can learn about what people have already been doing,
yeah.
and not just the new people, but people that have had tried and true processes. Patience is something that's really difficult for most of us to have in life in general, and in winemaking, that is certainly true. And patience can pay off in spades, but you need to kind of stick to the course, and a lot of people can't stick to the course.
No, I'm just imagining these like heavy set, balding French winemakers with their gauloises, chain smoking them, their ill-fitting shirts, hovering over the microphone, like just talking in French about their techniques to some podcast host on the other side. It's a fun image, is what I'm putting together. Um, as we're starting to wrap up, since we are past the 8 o'clock hour, what do you see as the future of tercero wines? Where would you like to go with things? Are there grapes out there that you have not yet worked with that you would like to? I know, curiosity is your main driver, but what do you see your brand becoming over the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Well, there's always varieties that I'm going to want to work with, but as you said, I have so many SKUs. I'm stupid to continue to expand those SKUs. So that's really the challenge, is to not work with a lot more varieties and add more SKUs to the circus. So I'd be looking to work with some of the same varieties I'm working with now, but from different sites, to continue to expand, to look at what that site brings to that individual variety. So whether that is Grenache, whether that is Counoise, whether that's Cinsault, there's certainly plenty of vineyards out there. But it's a really we're at a pivotal time right now in our industry in terms of trying to understand where things are going. And it's a time to be very cautious and trepidatious more than anything else, and really kind of hone in on what you do best and what the messaging is. And what I need to do is improve my messaging and kind of reach to more people. Whether that's through podcasts, whether that's through interviews, whether that's through things like this, whatever it takes. I'm a 70s garage band. I just need to play more clubs.
Well, you're the quintessential like street team guy who seems like he's getting people to hand out flyers on every corner and getting his name out there. You're the one. You're the one who's out there handing out flyers everywhere, and it seems like everywhere we go, you're ubiquitous. I mean, a lot of people know you through not just the Rhone Rangers, but on the Paso Robles Wine Fanatics page. You're always one to comment and post and whatnot, which I think obviously helps your brand, helps your notoriety out there. So I imagine that's a core component of kind of where you see the future of your brand.
I mean, that and again, still exploring, but I think I already, it's funny because people come to town, they're like, oh, I'm looking for something different. Like I'm looking around my tasting room, like I don't know how much more different I can be than most
Right.
other people in the area, but people they don't look at me as being that way, right? So um it's positioning more than anything else. I mean, I was excited to do pet nats this year. We've talked about that a little bit. And for those who don't know what a pet nat is, it's kind of a method ancestral. It's the original way of making sparkling wine. It's scary as heck because you put wine into a bottle and you walk away from it and palletize it and hope that it continues to ferment. We did two of them this year. My wife loves sparkling wine, so this was another nod to her. It scared the living dickens out of me. She kept asking me when we were hand bottling the wines if I was okay, and I kept saying no, uh, because I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I'm happy about the results that those have had, and we'll probably do that again. But again, keeping it small. I would rather make less wine per SKU and sell it out than have a lot of wine because I really like that variety and sit on that wine for a long time. So that's also part of the philosophy as well, is that when making the wines, really thinking about how much I need to make rather than how much I want to make. Um,
Right.
so, and I now have a distributor in California, but it's kind of a distributor on consignment. So I make mainly hand sell wines, and that's a challenge in our industry. When you're making wines that are mainstream wines, people like to sell them because they sell themselves. When you're making Counoise and people can't pronounce it, it's a real challenge, and it's the path I've chosen. And I know I've chosen it, and I'm happy to live with it, but it is a lot more difficult path, that's for sure.
I mean, I love a good Carignan wine. It's delicious and Carignani. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's delicious.
Oh, my favorite is, I mean, so Ken Volk would call Mourvedre move over deer. So to this day, I mean, I still use that whenever I talk about Mourvedre. So the name should not get in the way of it. But obviously, when you have a new variety, people don't know how to pronounce it. And even that is intimidating to people. It really is.
Oh yeah, I'm still freaked out to this day. When I first met Bill Frick up in Sonoma, he would call Viognier Vanier, and I'm like, I don't think that's correct, but he has so much more experience and has been doing this for so much longer that he's probably right, and I can't like correct him on it. But
That's
sure,
just
Vanier.
that's a North Coast pronunciation. They don't know what they're talking about up there. So
That's like a I think I saw Vanier on the podcast with Joe Rogan the other day talking about things. So Theo Vanier is the name of it. So you have your tasting room in downtown Los Olivos. You have what's been fun is watching you kind of rotate around the space. I assume you'll eventually take over the Larner spot right there at the intersection of Grand and Alamo Pintado, based on just the sheer movement of your tasting room. But if folks are in Los Olivos, want to come up, do a tasting, meet you, taste through your wines, meet your staff, what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, the best way, in all honesty, is reach out to me. If all of you have my email address, all you need to do is email me. Let me know you want to come in. I'm more than happy to give you guys comp tastings. I'm unfortunately, I say that my tasting room is in the Bermuda Triangle of tasting rooms because I'm right in between a bunch of people who are a lot more popular than I am, so it always makes it challenging. Um,
I don't know. You've
but right,
got Piazza next to you, and I love.
what was
I
that?
know Preston's not like their day to day, but I think I feel like you've got some fun stuff around you. You've got a fun corner over there.
Oh, we have a fun corner, but the problem is people are not going to as many places on a daily basis as they used to.
Hmm.
So they're going to go to the places that they're familiar with. And
Yeah.
again, I'm just, even though you say that I'm ubiquitous on social media, etc., people they're not searching me out in a way that I would hope that they would. So obviously I need to talk more. I have no problem being loquacious, so that's not a problem. We're gonna continue with that.
Put out some A frames down at the corner and bring people in.
No.
Everybody there is their own. Um, what since you are part of the Rhone Rangers, and we've had quite a few Rhone wines. What do you guys have coming up for the Rhone Rangers?
So we'll be doing a tasting in Oregon in June in McMinnville. In November, we'll be in San Francisco. And then I am hoping for us to be in LA in May of 2027. Still working on that right now. And then we'll be in Paso again in March, as we usually are. That's our main tasting. We hope to go back to Texas next year. We might be going to Colorado for the first time. I mean, Rhone varieties are grown in a lot of different places. And so we're really trying to branch out and offer our member wineries as much kind of face time with consumers as possible. So, but I take part in a lot of tastings. I take part in a lot of winemaker dinners. I'll be down in San Diego County next week doing winemaker dinners on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'll be in Orange County doing a winemaker dinner on Sunday. I'll be in San Dimas doing a winemaker dinner in May. So, yeah, I'm out and about doing as much as I can.
Yeah, you are a hustler if there ever was one in the wine industry, and I think that's one of the things I love about you. I am a huge fan. I hope we consider ourselves friends. Obviously, there are some people in the industry who look at what you do and think negatively upon you, because they feel like somebody who brings that much attention themselves is pulling attention away from the wines. But as you know, in this day and age, you've got to get your name out there, get your brand out there to get people's attention and sell wines. I think that's the most important thing.
Indeed, I agree. And
Exactly.
and and be true to yourself. I mean, I have a
Yeah.
sign that says I'm the indie rock of Los Olivos, and I kind of feel that way that I know who I am. I'm going to be who I am, whether I'm in front of 5 people or 5,000.
Yeah.
And I've really the last 5 years I've grown much more comfortable with knowing that, and I think it's really helped me quite a bit. It's helped me connect with people in a better way. It's helped me understand myself, but also helped me understand how other people work, what other people hopefully like, and the way I'm hoping our industry moves forward.
Yeah. Love you or hate you, the one thing that people cannot say is that you're not authentic and true to yourself. And I think that's what makes you so iconic and makes your wines so interesting and good and explorable, and forces people to seek them out, which they should, because they are delicious. And I am a huge fan, and I'm fanboying it up a little bit, but that's all right. So yeah, we will send out your email to everybody tomorrow when I send out the replay of this. But at this point, if can you stick around for a couple of minutes if people want to unmute themselves and ask you any questions?
Yeah, well, there was one question that Jody asked about should I think it was the Marsanne, should be stored at a wine fridge or at
Yes.
room temperature. I store it as I do all my other wines, all my other red wines. I don't necessarily store it. If I'm going to be laying that down for a while, I'd rather it be colder, slightly colder. But again, any temperature you want to. I'm also curious just from everyone what their favorite of the four wines were. If you had a favorite. And you don't have to have a favorite, but I was just curious if one surprised you more than the others, or left an impact on you more than the others.
So yeah, if you want to answer, Larry, please feel free to unmute yourself at this point. This is the free for all portion of our event. I will say, I still love and adore your Cinsault. I did not open the Carignan tonight. I'm saving that for a ribeye because that is always my test for a good Carignan. So I reserve the right to put the Carignan in front of it. But the Marsanne was like the butterscotch on the nose of that, and I mean, we joked about the like the sauterne without sweetness, but it has such sweet notes to the nose, the honey, the butterscotch, the toffee, but then the dryness on the palate. It's so unique and so interesting that I it's bringing me around.
Awesome. Glad to hear that.
Go ahead, anybody else? Feel free. Don't be afraid.
I'll unmute. I usually
We're all
can't talk
friends.
at the end of these because I'm a lightweight, but I can talk tonight because I only tried two. But Larry, I've been to your tasting room. It's been years and I live so close now. And as I thought of that tonight, I remember the photo of your feet on the wall of your tasting room. And
Yep.
so every time you talked about the foot stomp, I kept picturing, oh yeah, I remember that photo. So enjoyed everything. Love the different varieties that we tasted tonight. So thank you for that.
Awesome. And I've expanded my offerings a lot over the last 5 years.
Love it.
So I mean,
Phenomenal.
being, like I said, being curious has led me to really exploring varieties, and just having fun with them more than anything else.
Very French, and I loved
Yes.
everything about that.
Awesome.
His
Thank
feet
you.
have not expanded though.
No.
Well, I love that though. I love that you're like, I stomped hard, and I'm like, hey, you're just being honest.
Yes.
So Jody, did you have a favorite of the four tonight, or at least the
I only
two?
tried two. Like I said, I'm a little person. I love them both. I mean, I can't wait to try. I had put in order what I thought we were doing, so it did surprise me that the one white was going to be last. Didn't open that. I just like the different names too. I have to look at them to pronounce it though. So I already put the first white in the fridge, so I can't pronounce it without looking. Pole Pont?
The Picpoul.
Oh,
Picpoul.
Picpoul. I
Yeah.
just love it. I feel like it's so much fun to get to say these names that sound made up. I love it.
It's like push pull, but Picpoul. Like you
There you
pick
go.
when
Picpoul.
you're grabbing a grape, you pick and then you pull.
Yes.
That's how
And I tend to get very animated when I say names that don't sound normal. Picpoul. I say it very different. So appreciate tonight. It was very interesting.
Love it.
excellent. Patty, I know you and David were you unmuted yourself and we're gonna contribute.
I'm
They're
in,
up in the box.
all right, I'm back. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was in the kitchen during the answer to the wine fridge versus room temperature. And I would love to hear your answer again, Larry. I'm so sorry to it. I'm really embarrassed to admit that.
So I don't like the Marsanne. I don't chill. So I'm gonna store that like I am a red wine. I'm gonna store it more like a red wine than a white wine.
At about 70 degrees or
Um,
less.
I, no, I store my red wines cooler than that. But
Okay.
as storing temperature is really variable, right? You can the warmer you store a wine at, the faster it's going to age. The colder you store a wine at. So if you have a wine that you love exactly how it is, put it in a regular refrigerator and leave it in there. Because at 45 degrees, it's not going to change much. The warmer it gets, the more it's going to evolve.
Mhm.
And I'll chime in here because one of the keys to aging wine is consistency, where even if you're keeping the wine at 70, if it is staying at 70 the entire time and it's not fluctuating up and down, that's going to assist
over
the longevity of it.
Yes.
right by this column. Right there.
So Larry, how do you store your wines?
In boxes.
Come on, not in a warehouse in boxes at 100 degrees. So come on.
No, the actually our wines are stored in warehouses, but the warehouses are temperature controlled. So it is not going to we're not seeing huge differences in heat spikes with how we're storing the wines. So, but they're not stored really, really cold. I would say probably in the 60-degree range or so.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I love aged whites. And I when I get a white that I like, I put it under my stairs, which is about 70 degrees year round.
Yeah.
And let it sit there for a year or two.
Yeah.
And then I enjoy it incredibly.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
And then, no, that sounds perfect. I mean, I think people make too much of the temperature at which wine is stored at. As wine is more durable than we think it's going to be.
Yep.
It can heat up a little bit. Obviously, you don't want to heat it up for long periods of time, but if it heats up a little bit, it's normally not detrimental to the wine. And that's even including shipping. You don't want to have it in elevated temperatures for too long, but people freak out if a wine gets more than 75 degrees when it's shipping, and normally it's not going to have an adverse effect to it.
Yep.
Normally.
David has aged tremendously since I last saw him. I just saw him walking in the background of your.
Oh yeah, he had total knee replacement surgery.
Oh, poor guy.
And so
I was joking. It was somebody who wasn't David who was walking.
No, well, it's my David who is having problem walking. And so, yep, that's him right there. And he walks slowly, and it's balance issues now with the surgery. It's just a real slow recovery. But he's working on it.
My prescription for him is more wine, and you should listen to me because I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You're totally a doctor.
Doctor of love.
Dr. Feelgood.
Doctor of vino love. Exactly. Thank you.
Oh, I don't want to hear that.
I was just going to chime in and say we like this in some.
So Ed, you said the Cinsault is your favorite?
Yeah, so Cinsault is our favorite.
Oh, for me, it was a Carignan.
Carignan.
Thank you, Carignan. That just was amazing. And once the Marsanne warmed up, the Marsanne.
So
we tried it cold, and it wasn't very good.
No, the Marsanne is not as interesting when it's cold.
Yeah.
So the Carignan, I will say, a guy that I had working for me used to sing it like Boston. He would say "carry on" instead of "carry on." So you can go there too.
That's Kansas. Kansas, not Boston.
Kansas. Sorry, I got my super groups mixed up.
Carignan, my wayward.
Exactly.
When you're aged, you know you're fine.
Uh-oh, Chris.
Say your weary cork.
We've lost him.
We lost him.
Oh no! Am I still there?
No, you're there.
You're still there, Chris. You're good.
Lost singing.
Oh, the singing. Yes. Well, yes. I have a history of making up parody songs. Weird Al is an idol of mine. There you go. All right. So we have a vote for the Carignan. We have a vote for this Cinsault. A vote for the Marsanne. Anyone else? Pam, Stacy, you want to chime in on this?
I love the Cinsault. I love them all. The Picpoul I thought was delicious. It was much better than a glass of Ojai Picpoul I had yesterday at lunch in town. But I thought that the Cinsault was a kind of revelation. We had it with some pasta with leeks and tarragon, and it was delicious. And I could see having it with seafood or something as well.
Mr. Atkins, you want to hold some of these, John? Sure.
That's awesome.
But I loved all four of the wines, really, very much. I thought it was
Very educational. And I always love learning something new.
Hmm.
You know, there's so much about wine that I don't know. And I mean, I love drinking wine and I have wines and I've known Chris. How long have we known each other, Chris? At least 10 years?
Yes,
Probably.
since I was 15.
Since
Yeah, me too.
when Chris had his brick and mortar store, Forgotten Grapes, that's when we first met in Riverside. So, but I always feel like there's something more to learn. And that's why we stay in the wine club, because I always feel like I learn something new with every discussion. And Larry, very much, you were a good educator, and I appreciated your information tonight.
Well, thank you. Well, Chris also asked a lot of really good questions too. You know, you have to make sure that I'm prompted to answer things that hopefully people are interested in hearing about. So,
but you did a great job picking up the slack when I dropped off for a few minutes. So thank you for that. But yeah, fun fact: Larry's. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. It was your outlier Gewürztraminer, and I don't think it was the Syrah, but it was one other wine that you had. Were two of the original wines when I launched the Forgotten Grapes wine shop back in 2011 that we carried there. So I was always grateful to Larry. You know, when I met him back at a family winemakers event years ago, down in San Diego, that he was willing to distribute to me, you know, winery direct, so I could carry his wines, because I just loved his story, but also loved his philosophy of winemaking, and that's why I think we've remained friends and in touch since those days. And you know, I've always been a proponent of his and try to do everything I can to let people know about tercero and tercero wines and the fun thing that he's doing.
awesome. Well, I appreciate the support.
Yes, Stacy, you're the last one. Do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I really enjoyed. I mean, all the wines were fantastic. I love Picpoul Blanc. It's so good. Yours had such nice crisp brightness, really delicious. And same with like the Cinsault is fantastic. And I like how you said you can drink it with so many courses. You can really taste it. And then I poured the Carignan like kind of side by side, just on the nose, and just the difference, like sort of more the stemminess and the, you know, greenness of the Carignan, and the, you know, kind of balanced. I mean, they're all very balanced, but very delicious. And the Marsanne, really interesting of how not having it as cold, because it sat out for a while. I mean, I had it in the fridge and then sit it out. I like the description of kind of like that heavier, sort of like whiskey style. You know, I had never thought about that with the Marsanne and a Roussanne. So that was a really fun way to kind of like shift how I thought about those grapes.
Yeah,
Really like that.
I mean, the thing is, if those wines are picked really ripe and they have a lot more alcohol on them, you can't have them at room temperature. The alcohol is going to be too prominent.
Yeah, it's nice.
Even
Nothing drank hot. Like we've had some wines where like, oh, there's the alcohol. Like, ooh, that's too hot, you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say, even Bob Lindquist, when we poured his Marsanne a couple years ago, wasn't insistent about us doing that at room temperature. So I appreciate, you know, Larry's not only insistence, but his explanation for why it makes sense to pour a grape like Marsanne at a room temperature. You know, if you're going to put a little bit of chill on it, don't take it down to refrigerator temperature, but pull it out well in advance to ensure you get not just the aromatics, but the richness of the body and the mouthfeel of it. I think mouthfeel is one of those things with wines that not a lot of sommeliers, influencers, you know, people really talk about, but I think it's one of the prominent things that everybody can feel, and B, it's very easy to understand. Like, I can say, oh, you're going to get, you know, lychee and white peach on this, and you may not have any idea what those things taste like. But if I say this has got an oily consistency, or it's steely, or it's stony, or whatnot, like, people understand that with the mouthfeel. And I think that goes a long way.
Agreed.
Nice. All right. It feels like this is a good place to wrap it up, since we're up to 8:30. So Larry, thank you so much. we'll be sending out his contact information so folks can get in touch with them. His tasting room is in Los Olivos, downtown Los Olivos, if you're going to go visit. Next month we will be we'll be coming back up to Shadowrun, or excuse me, to Paso. We'll be doing another revisit with Shadowrun Winery, my good friend Aaron Hunt. Very small southerly winery here in Paso. Fun wines, really interesting stuff. So the email will be going out next week. Keep an eye on that. But thank you again, Larry. We appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next month in May for Shadowrun. So
Thank you, Larry. Thank you,
guys.
Thank
Larry.
you.
all
Have a
right.
good night,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody. Good night. Oop. Gotta hit the end button. Where's the end button? That's not it. There it is.